What began as a simple morning show interview quickly turned into a national spectacle when Meghan Markle stormed off the CBS set after a tense live-in-air confrontation with Gayle King. Security was called, producers were stunned, and the footage has already sparked a firestorm online. Was Gayle crossing a line, or was Meghan caught in her own contradictions? Stick around, because what you're about to hear is unbelievable. Before we dive into this explosive story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment like this. CBS Mornings usually runs like clockwork. The set is bright and polished. The tone is calm but engaging. Hosts guide viewers through interviews, headlines, and morning updates without skipping a beat. The energy is steady and familiar, like the quiet hum of a well-run newsroom. Gayle King sits at the center of it all. She brings decades of experience, a warm presence, and a sharp eye for getting to the truth. Viewers trust her, colleagues respect her. She has handled everything from celebrity sit-downs to hard-hitting investigations. She rarely loses control of a segment. On this particular morning, the buzz in the studio felt different. Cameras were in place, crew members were moving with more urgency than usual. There was a quiet tension in the air that nobody could quite explain. Meghan Markle had arrived. She was scheduled to discuss a new global initiative focused on women's rights and education. She stepped onto the set in a simple yet elegant cream-colored blouse, paired with a tailored beige skirt. Her hair was softly styled, her posture poised. She smiled politely, shaking hands with the production team. From the outside, everything looked normal, but something felt off. Meghan's entrance was not followed by the usual light banter with staff. She went straight to her seat. Her phone stayed close by. She kept checking it, almost like she was waiting for something. Gayle noticed but said nothing. The producers gave the countdown. The segment began. The first few seconds moved smoothly. Gayle welcomed viewers and introduced Meghan with praise for her activism and humanitarian work. Meghan responded with a warm thank you. Still, behind the smiles, both women seemed guarded. Meghan answered the first few questions carefully. With polite distance, Gayle nodded along, but her expression stayed serious. There was no small talk, no laughter, none of the easy rhythm these interviews usually have. Gayle leaned in slightly. As she spoke, as if preparing to shift direction, Meghan crossed one leg over the other and looked directly at her, ready for whatever was coming next. What happened after that would leave the studio in silence, shake CBS to its core, and ignite a firestorm online. But in that moment, just before things turned, the studio lights still glowed, the teleprompter rolled forward, and the illusion of a calm morning held together by a thread. Gayle King began the interview with the calm authority she is known for. She smiled warmly and spoke in a measured tone. She thanked Meghan Markle for joining them that morning and praised her efforts around education and global advocacy. The camera cut to Meghan, who nodded appreciatively and offered a gracious reply. She thanked Gayle for the kind words and said she was excited to talk about her new initiative. Her voice was soft but confident. She explained how the project aimed to provide resources for young women in underserved communities. She spoke about hope, equity, and long-term change. The room stayed still. The lighting was perfect. The flow felt easy, and viewers likely settled in expecting a typical feel-good segment. Meghan shared stories from her travels. She mentioned meeting girls in remote villages and how their resilience inspired her. Gayle responded with gentle affirmations. Everything seemed fine on the surface. But there was an undercurrent. Meghan's words, while passionate, were careful. Her tone never fully relaxed. Gayle, too, seemed to be waiting for the right moment. Then came the shift. Gayle leaned in just slightly. Her voice softened even more. She said she hoped Meghan would not mind a different kind of question. Meghan's smile flickered. She said she was open to it. Gayle asked, not aggressively but clearly, whether Meghan felt her recent public efforts had been shaped by what happened during her time with the royal family. She framed it as a natural connection, not a challenge. Meghan paused. Her eyes narrowed just a little. She responded thoughtfully, but something had clearly changed. The temperature dropped. The energy shifted. The segment had quietly taken a turn. Let us know in the comments, did this moment feel like a fair question or a setup? And do not forget to subscribe for more real talk like this. Gayle took a brief pause, then glanced at her notes before looking back at Meghan. She said there had been public confusion around a few claims Meghan had made in past interviews. She was calm, but the direction of the conversation was no longer neutral. Gayle mentioned the wedding date. She said Meghan once told Oprah that she and Prince Harry had a private ceremony days before the official royal wedding. But then later, official records showed that the legal wedding happened on the public date. Gayle said some viewers had questions. Was it a misunderstanding or something else? Meghan's smile tightened. She nodded slowly and said she understood the confusion. She explained that the private moment between her and Harry was symbolic. It felt more personal, more real to them than the formal ceremony. She said it was never about changing facts. It was about what the moment meant to her. She added that people sometimes get caught up in legal language and miss the emotional truth. Gayle listened, then gently moved on to another point. She said there had also been debate around Meghan's comments about royal media training. In past interviews, Meghan said she received no help from the palace on how to deal with the press or public speaking. But then, some reports said she had attended several official sessions early on. Gayle asked if Meghan felt those sessions did not count or if there was something missing from the story. Meghan shifted in her seat. She looked directly at Gayle and said people were confusing surface-level coaching with real support. She said yes, there were briefings and protocols, but that was not the same as emotional guidance. She felt isolated. She said the people around her focused more on rules than her well-being. Then she added, there is a difference between what sounds true and what feels true. I shared my truth. The air in the studio changed. You could feel it, even through the screen. The friendly tone had started to fade. There was no yelling, no sharp words. But the rhythm had changed. The questions were sharper, and the answers carried more weight. The crew behind the cameras stood a little more still. Viewers at home leaned in. Gayle remained composed, but her voice grew slightly more direct. She said people respected Meghan's voice, but some also wanted clarity. When public figures speak about pain and injustice, those words matter. Meghan said she understood that, but she added that her experience was personal, raw, and never filtered through a press team. She said when people challenge her version of events, they are really challenging her pain. Gayle nodded. There was a pause, not uncomfortable, but heavy. The space between the words started to fill with something stronger than simple conversation. It was no longer just a morning show interview. It was starting to feel like a reckoning. Gayle leaned in just slightly and asked about one of the most talked about moments from Meghan's Oprah interview. The moment when Meghan said, a senior royal expressed concern over the skin tone of her unborn child. It was a claim that sparked headlines around the world. Gayle said people were still trying to make sense of it. She asked why Meghan never named the person. Why keep it vague? When the allegation was so serious, Meghan's expression turned careful. She said it was never about exposing someone. It was about telling the truth of how that conversation made her feel. She said at the time, she and Harry were trying to protect the people involved. Not because they agreed with them, but because of family ties. Meghan said she believed in accountability, but not cruelty. She said it was a painful moment that still echoed in her heart. Gayle acknowledged the pain but pushed again. She said vague accusations leave room for confusion and speculation. Without clarity, the public is left to guess. She asked if protecting someone should come at the cost of clarity or justice. Meghan's face changed. She sat up straighter. She said they were speaking from personal experience, not on behalf of a court case. She said people often want exact names and dates, but what they lived through was not a press release. It was raw, emotional, and constantly shifting. The temperature on set continued to rise. Gayle was respectful, but firm. She asked if Meghan believed the public had a right to know who made the comment. Meghan paused, then said this. There is a difference between telling your truth and feeding a media fire. We spoke our truth, and we let people judge for themselves. The room grew quiet. It was not a silence of awkwardness, but tension. The kind of tension that comes when two people are trying to be honest from very different angles. On one side, Gayle was asking the questions many people wanted answered. On the other, Meghan was guarding a story that was deeply personal. In the audience, reactions began to split. Some people felt Gayle was holding Meghan accountable, like any strong journalist should. Others felt she was pushing too hard, especially on a topic that dealt with race and identity. Online, comments started pouring in. Some defended Meghan's choice to stay vague. Others demanded names, dates, and more details. The moment had moved beyond just two women talking on a set. It became a mirror for the audience. For the media, for the royal family, it was no longer just about Meghan and Gayle. It was about what people believed truth should look like. Gayle took a careful breath and shifted the conversation. She brought up something that had divided public opinion since the Oprah interview. The claims about Meghan's mental health struggles. In that interview, Meghan said she reached out for help while in the palace but was told no. Gayle said the palace had since pushed back, suggesting support had been available, that Meghan could have reached out to trained professionals, that the door was not closed. Meghan's face grew more serious. She did not hesitate. She said the idea that help was easy to find was simply false in her experience. She said she went to senior aides, people who were supposed to care for her well-being, and they told her it would not look good for the institution. She said they made her feel like she was the problem, not someone in pain. Gayle asked if she ever considered seeking help outside the royal system. Meghan nodded slowly, but said when you are living inside a controlled system, the walls feel high. She said she was isolated, monitored, and told repeatedly that going public with mental health concerns would reflect badly on the family. She said her voice felt silenced. Then Gayle mentioned the media again. She asked about reports quoting anonymous palace sources who claimed Meghan was difficult behind the scenes, that she bullied staff, that she played the victim. Meghan leaned in, her voice stayed calm, but firm. She said those stories were not just hurtful, they were part of a campaign to discredit her. She called it character assassination. She said they could not attack her story directly, so they used whispers and headlines. The words hung heavy. Anonymous sources. Character assassination. These were not just media terms, they were about reputation, survival, identity. The conversation started to feel less like an interview and more like a confrontation. Two strong women, both respected, both women of color, trying to speak the truth from different directions. There was no shouting, no insults, but the tension was thick. You could feel the stakes rising. Gayle looked thoughtful. She said she believed Meghan's pain, but she also said millions were trying to understand the full picture. She asked, can both things be true? That you were in deep pain, and that help may have been closer than you thought. Meghan responded softly, maybe, but when you are that low, when no one answers your cries, even close feels miles away. That line landed hard. In the studio, on social media, in living rooms, everywhere. It was a powerful moment, a reminder that mental health is not just about access. It is about being heard, being believed, being safe enough to ask for help in the first place. And in that moment, the world saw how fragile and complicated that journey can be. The air inside the studio had already grown tense, but this was the moment it cracked wide open. Meghan shifted. In her seat, no longer calm, her voice got sharper. She looked Gayle straight in the eyes and asked, are you here as my friend or as their mouthpiece? That hit hard. You could feel the energy shift. Gayle sat back for a second, then leaned forward. She said, without flinching, this is journalism, Meghan, not an ambush. You knew we would talk about more than your project. Meghan shook her head. She said that was not the problem. The problem was the tone, the framing. She said this interview felt less like a conversation and more like a setup. She pointed to the way certain questions were worded. She said it was exactly how the tabloids used to twist her words. And now it felt like Gayle, someone she once trusted, was doing the same thing. Gayle pushed back. She said asking tough questions was not betrayal. It was part of holding public figures accountable. She said they both knew the stakes going in. Gayle reminded her that truth only holds power when it stands up to pressure. Meghan stood up. She actually stood up from her seat. Mic still clipped to her. Her voice was rising now. She said this is what always happens. A woman speaks up, especially a woman of color, and the story turns against her. She said they build you up, then rip you down the minute you stop being quiet. Gayle motioned to the crew, trying to de-escalate. She said, sit down, Meghan, please, we can talk through this. But Meghan did not sit. She said she was tired of being polite while the world poked at her trauma. Tired of being told what pain was valid and what was inconvenient. She said, even this interview, which was supposed to help, felt like another layer of control. Another system trying to silence her truth. Behind the cameras, the crew looked uncertain. The director had his hand hovering over the console. One producer whispered, should we go to break? But they kept rolling. Gayle stayed seated. Her face was calm, but you could see she was hurt too. She told Meghan, this was not meant to tear you down. It was meant to give you space to speak clearly. People have questions. People deserve answers. Meghan looked at her, eyes filled with frustration. She said the only thing people seem to want is for her to crack, and when she does, they call it drama. She said no one asked how deep the damage runs, just how loud the headlines can be. And then, in one final sentence before storming off stage, she said, maybe the real problem is not the royal family. Maybe it is the way systems like this one keep protecting them, while women like me are left to burn. With that, she pulled off her mic and walked off set. The room fell silent. No music, no cut to commercial, just the weight of that final line hanging in the air. Meghan had already pulled off her mic. Her body language was clear. She was leaving. She moved quickly, heading for the edge of the set. But just before she reached the curtains, two security team members stepped in. They were not aggressive, just cautious. Their hands were up, palms out, signaling calm. They asked her to wait for a moment. The crew stood frozen. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Cameras were still rolling. It was not clear if this was going out live or if someone would step in and cut the feed. The room felt like it had stopped breathing. Gayle stood now too. She took a few steps toward Meghan and said, let us finish. Just two more questions, please. Her voice was steady, but there was something almost pleading in her tone. This was spiraling fast, and she knew it. Meghan paused but did not turn back. She said she was done. That she had already said too much and that staying would only make it worse. Her voice cracked slightly when she added, I should have never come here. Gayle stepped closer. She said this did not have to end like this. That they could still talk, still clear the air. But Meghan looked over her shoulder and said, there is no air to clear when people have already made up their minds. The security guards looked to the director. unsure whether to guide Meghan out or step back. The control room was silent. 2. No one had planned for this. This was not just a guest walking off. This was something else. Something raw and real. Meghan finally moved past the crew and disappeared behind the curtain. The studio stayed still. A few producers exchanged stunned glances. One of them quietly asked, "Was that live?" No one answered. Everyone was too busy replaying what they had just witnessed. Something had broken, and no one knew how or if it could be put back together. As Meghan reached the edge of the set, she turned back one last time. Her eyes locked with Gayle's. The room was already tense, but what came next pushed it over the edge. Meghan's voice was steady, but the anger was clear. She said CBS was not just airing the interview. They were part of the machine, the same machine she had been fighting for years. She said this whole thing was never about truth, only ratings. Gayle did not flinch. She waited, then stepped forward. She looked directly at Meghan and said, "You cannot hide behind racism when the facts do not line up." Her tone was sharp, cutting through the room like glass. It was not just a challenge, it was a line in the sand. The crew froze. Meghan's mouth opened slightly, shocked but not surprised. She called Gayle a traitor to women, to truth, and to everything she once claimed to stand for. She said this interview was supposed to be about healing. Instead, it had become a takedown. Gayle held her ground. She did not shout back. She just shook her head, slowly, as if trying to understand what had happened between them. Meghan stared for a second longer, then turned. That it was a verbal mic drop from both women. No one had more to say. Nothing was left to fix. The studio went completely quiet. No footsteps, no whispers, no cue from the control room. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, unsure whether to keep rolling. This was not how anyone expected it to end. Not with two women of color, once allies, now divided so publicly. It was not just an argument. It was a fracture, one that felt too deep to heal on air. Meghan stormed toward the exit. Her heels clicked hard against the studio floor, each step louder than the last. A security guard moved quickly to intercept her. Not to stop her, just to calm the scene. But the moment his hand raised, Meghan snapped. She turned sharply and shouted, "Do not tell me to calm down." Her voice echoed across the room. The tension, already high, exploded. Everyone on set froze. Some looked toward the control room, waiting for someone to call cut. No one did. Gayle stayed at her spot. She did not move, did not respond. Meghan turned back toward her. Her voice was low now, but every word was clear. "You will regret this," she said. No one dared to breathe. The cameras were still rolling, lights still on. This was not a segment anymore. This was real. Gayle looked at Meghan. Her face was still, but her head slowly shook from side to side. Not in anger, not in victory, just quiet disbelief. Maybe even sadness. Meghan paused at the studio doors. For a moment, it looked like she might say more, but she did not. She walked out without turning back. Inside, the room stayed frozen. The cameras captured every second, but no one spoke. There was nothing left to say. Gayle took a deep breath. She straightened her papers, though she was not really looking at them. Her voice was calm, but you could still feel the weight behind it. She looked straight into the camera and said, "This was meant to be a conversation, a space for honesty, not hostility." Her words were steady, but her eyes told a different story. There was hurt there, not just from what had been said, but from how it all fell apart. The studio was still tense. The crew stayed quiet, unsure if they should move or wait for instructions. Some whispered behind cameras. Others just stood there, frozen in disbelief. It was clear this was not the segment anyone had planned. Gayle continued. She said CBS would air the full footage, nothing cut, nothing hidden. She wanted people to see what really happened. Not just the headlines or the sound bites, but the full picture. The audience deserves that, she said. Behind the scenes, phones were already buzzing. Tweets were going out. Clips were being shared. People were choosing sides before the credits even rolled. Some defended Meghan. Others stood with Gayle. The conversation was no longer just between the two women. It had gone far beyond the studio walls. But in that moment, sitting there under the lights, Gayle stayed composed. She thanked the viewers for watching and promised more context in the coming days. Then she looked down for a second, collected herself, and the screen faded to black. So what really happened here? Was this a journalist doing her job or a friend crossing the line? Did Gayle King push too far? Or was Meghan Markle simply not ready for the hard questions? These moments are never black and white. They live in the messy middle, where truth and emotion collide on live television. Now we want to hear from you. What do you think? Was this accountability, ambush, or something in between? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Every perspective matters here. And if you want more bold breakdowns like this, the stories everyone else is afraid to touch, make sure to subscribe. You will not want to miss what comes next.